So, Cormac, you have a question for the show? You ask Archispeak.com. Is that what you?
I do. I have a question.
Well, you sent it. You sent it on text message.
Which
W-
which question?
Why don't people talk about or teach about
Genius loci.
genius loci? So it says genius,
Genius
and then
loci. Genius loci.
yeah, yeah. So
Yes.
and my response is never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Which means that apparently they didn't teach it in
I could
Pomona.
have been sleeping. I could have been sleeping.
Well, I will preface this by the professor that did teach this had a master's from another school in philosophy. And so that very much could have been the root of the reason.
L- So Latin philosophical roots is what I'm hearing here.
He was Turkish.
Well, I mean the term
Yes.
is Latin, right? Yeah. So
Yes.
all
And
right. So translate. What does this mean?
well, I mean, honestly, spirit of the place, what does that mean for everybody? Is it what an architect does or what an architect contributes to? Is it when you think of a place like a place that's near and dear to your heart, right? That is a special place to you. That's its genius loci. And I don't know if we can create it without understanding what it is that where it
Mm,
is and what it is that we're building. In fact, I don't know if it's one of the it's interesting because I always struggle with what excites me about architecture. It's this emotional impulse, this like kind of like, oh my God, this place is great. And you're like, well, what is it? What do you mean by what does it make? Like, what makes it great? And you're like, it's hard to explain. It's just this emotional feeling. It's this overwhelming
yeah.
thing. And that to me is genius loci.
So you're
But
talking about qualitative versus quantitative. And so when
completely, yes.
somebody says, what does that mean? Or it's like, well, it's I can't tell you. It's how it feels. It's how it makes me feel. It's
Right.
touchy feely. It's that end of the
Exactly.
spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when somebody's just like, well, how do you
You
know
know
that?
it when you see it
Exactly.
or feel it.
You know, when you're designing something and somebody says, well, how do you know that's right? This just feels right. You're like, well, what does that mean? Like, quantify it for me. It's just like, "Eh, look, it's like,
It's
look.
it's an output of experience and experience and experience.
So so what was interesting is it kind of came up. And so one of the things that I do want to talk about is something else. I did have another question, ask Archispeak. Uh,
Got them queued up. They're in the queue.
I have
All
another
right.
one, and I think I asked you and another friend of our show in a chat earlier today because of just another like chat that I was having, and it kind of goes into this kind of like why I started thinking about my old professor
Mm,
and this concept of genius loci and if I'm saying it wrong,
yep. Let
I
us know.
I'm not
Let
old.
Cormac know. Email Cormac.
I'm not old or Latin. Well, I am old, but I'm not Latin.
You are old.
I was gonna
Yes.
say I'm not old in Latin. I'm not old in Latin, but I'm just old.
Right.
And it was so it came about when I was thinking about my very first visit to Chicago, which was on an architectural tour. And I kind of had this opportunity to do some volunteer work this past weekend that then extended into something that actually turned out kind of pretty exciting. And we'll talk about that in a few. But it was was thinking about my professors and the two professors that took us on this trip, and one of them that was a he was a disciple of Mies van der Rohe. He worked with Mies van der Rohe. He was, and I took them. I don't want to give it away, but I saw some Mies this weekend as well. But so we were. I was at the Frank Lloyd Wright House and Studio. I was volunteering at the House and Studio. There was an event called the Wright Plus Tour, and what the Wright Plus tour was is that basically they open up a bunch of private homes that were either done by Wright or Wright adjacent. Right, Wright adjacent.
Okay.
So So what I mean by that is there was a handful of some of the houses that were open, these private houses that were open, that they were done by either disciples of Wright, former employees of
I like
Wright.
how you use this word disciples. You just keep throwing this word around.
Is that not how that's how
Maybe.
that's how they're explained, which is
Is that how it works?
which goes to this other Ask Archispeak question of is what do you call Frank? What do you
What,
call Frank Lloyd Wright?
who,
Um,
yeah, how do you refer
how do
him?
you refer
He
to
who
him?
is referred to as.
He
Yes.
who is referred to by most people in a very reverent tone as Mr. Wright.
Yeah, that I think that's just like the style guide for the
Yeah,
foundation though. Yeah.
probably, probably. And and so conversation today was it's like I find it really kind of presumptuous, not presumptuous, or he
You
called
got
me.
you pull up the tape. Rewind the tape. Let's do a playback here.
Yeah, just gotta figure out what.
You got to find the right word here.
Yeah. So, and I'm seriously not sure why I am blanking. Oh, presumptuous and pretentious to
To
call.
be a mister? To
No,
be
no,
a
no,
mister.
no, no. To call
Oh.
him, to be too familiar with him and call him Frank.
Oh, interesting.
I'm
So
like,
the other way around. Oh, so
so,
that's just the well, you don't have we don't have manners anymore as
right.
modern Americans. I mean, you ask my wife that's
Mhm.
how I know. And so I mean, if you watch like these old you like watching these old European TV shows,
Right.
the British shows and all, and really proper. It was everybody was Mister and Miss
Sure.
and yeah,
And if,
that's gone. Yeah.
and if by some slim chance I was living back there and I was a client of his, then sure, I would call him Mr. Wright, or, probably because I'm a client of his, would get familiar with him. It would be okay to call him Frank. I don't actually call him Frank. I call him Wright.
These are the stories architects tell themselves. You
Yeah,
call him right.
I call him Wright.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's right. You do. I actually just say the whole thing, Frank Lloyd, Frank Lloyd,
so,
right? Because it depends who you're talking to,
so
right?
what's interesting is I
And
polled a
their
bunch of people.
familiarity.
I
Yeah,
polled a bunch of people, and almost
you polled
every
us. Yeah, yep,
and
yep.
and a whole bunch of them answered, "Well, I just call him Frank Lloyd Wright." Yeah,
hmm
and I'm just like, that's like a mouthful. I'm bored halfway through the saying that.
My attention span doesn't last that long. That's what I'm
Exactly.
hearing.
I'm, it's just like
Well, you're so Mr. Efficiency.
hey, got to get it done, right? I
The
got,
problem with
I got deadlines.
you got to get it done right. I like here we go. I mean, you've the problem with the last name only
It's
is
done
there's
right,
at
or
least two different meanings
sure. Oh my goodness. So I will
for the
say that.
word.
So I will say that because I say right, and of course this right and right, and when you're talking about it, when you're giving a tour. So what I was is I was a volunteer docent and got to work in his home and studio. And here's a little pamphlet.
Oh, a brochure.
It's not
Booty. Tour booty.
it is not a
Oh, this is
brochure.
not a brochure.
It
Is
is
this your
it is the
Cliff's notes?
it is the cliff notes of like
It's your study guide.
if I had a speaking role, which I did,
Did you
then
wear a bow tie?
no, come on. Did I
Well,
tuck
Mr. Wright didn't approve of your
did I tuck
attire.
it? Did I tuck in my shirt? No.
I've seen you tuck in your shirt before.
Yeah, it's so uncomfortable. It is not me.
Okay.
It is so not me.
So
So,
you referred to him just as Wright in the tour?
well, what was funny is I actually I gotta sort of read
Did
my
you get a
interpretation. And
okay.
so there was these two. So when I got to this point here, flanking the entrances are a pair of crouching figures called the boulders. The
Mm.
sculptures represent man's struggle to rise above the bonds of earth, which is a metaphor for Wright's progressive ideas. And I'm like, and then I was like, whatever, Frank.
So when you're not approving, it's a first name basis. I
Yes.
get it. Yeah.
So so here, what was funny about that is it was man's struggle to rise above the bonds of earth. Now, when he added the studio onto his house in 1898,
Mm.
He was in his 20s. What struggles does a 20-year-old have? As parents of
Metaphorical struggles. I mean, it
metaphor.
was a metaphor
It,
for a metaphor.
it
Yeah.
was. It was actually great. So it was fantastic. But can you guess what I got chastised for? Or
Talking too much. Talking too much,
talking
obviously.
talking too much and slowing down the
Get a
tours.
podcast. Jeez.
I told him, I'm like, see, here's where you made the mistake. You gave a speaking role to an architect, educator, and a podcaster.
I love to talk. What are you talking about?
I was joking with somebody else, and they're like, "Don't they know that that's what you do for a living?"
Right.
I'm like, true, right? Like
And they're like, what? Yeah.
RIGHT, not WRIGH.
Well, okay. So, I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright, the full proper name,
FLW.
a lot of projects built.
Yes, lots.
How many genius loci?
So for me, when I go and visit, there is always an emotional reaction. There's always something about his understanding of the place. And I don't know if you recall when I sent you a photograph when I was at the Florida Southern College and we talked
I
about
do.
it.
I do recall. Yes.
And I was just like, come on now. Because it was this,
Damn.
well, I used another 4-letter word while I was there
Uh-huh.
because when I rounded the corner and in all of the conditions
It
were
just smacked
so
you.
right, it smacked me and it was just one of these like, this is an amazing space.
I need a sound bite of that for the podcast. That'd be a great way to kick off every episode. Okay, so let's be really clear here because the term that the Latin term genius loci, if we're saying that right,
Yes.
we don't know if we are, is the spirit of the place,
place.
right?
Yes.
And it's interesting when it comes to architecture because architecture is a place in a place to me.
Yes.
And
yes.
so what we're actually talking about is like the project in its setting, right? Partially. And
in
it's maybe
context.
it's a cultural aspect.
Yes.
Yeah, there's an
Yeah.
environmental aspect. There's all these different kind of layers
Yeah.
to that. And again, like really hard to quantify.
Right.
It's a qualitative sense that
Yes.
maybe could be described by somebody who's really good with words or expressing emotion or through photography or through being there, right? Like
Right.
this, it can happen. Like it can be communicated, but it's difficult to communicate. But being of a place, and like when I'm reading the definition here, I mean, it actually talks about architecture. It says aims to design buildings that respond to and enhance the genius loci rather than impose something foreign.
Right.
And so this is where Frank, your buddy Frank, comes in, right? The guy that Wright comes in,
Mr.
and
Wright.
and pretty damn good at that, right? Because it was very much about. I mean, that was kind of the thesis of his organic architecture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about like all of these different projects that he had all over the place, and you and I have had both shared and different experiences visiting, Wright houses together, places separately. I've been to Taliesin, Wisconsin. You've been to Taliesin West. Falling Water, all of these different places. And you almost can't imagine these places, not Falling Water, but the place that Falling Water now resides in without the house, right?
Mm.
And it is enhanced, it has become part of the spirit of the place, and you almost say, I can't imagine a world without it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when architecture embodies this genius loci. Boy, I hope my professor, Tarek Organ, is not listening to this and he's saying, you're getting it all wrong.
Well, we haven't studied up on it, but because like I said, this is new to me, but it's like when I read through this, I understand what we're talking about. And then what I really want to talk about is how you apply this in modern practice, because there are definitely architects who are capable of doing this, But
Yeah.
in a world with the time and resource pressures that there are on project teams, on construction, on budget, on all of these things, man, like it, we're talking
So
about two completely
yeah.
different eras of architecture, and it's not
Yeah.
like just in
Yeah.
contrast to each other when we're talking about the projects that you're talking about right now.
Well, it was interesting. So when we were talking to William Dodge and we were talking about the commoditization of architecture, I think when you're saying that, what we're saying is that there is it's almost this cookie cutter regurgitation of styles in every location, and it's
The
not really.
incentive is to spend less time, go faster,
Yeah.
do all the things,
How, how
but
many?
don't take your time designing.
Yeah.
And to me, this is all about like first
Yes.
understanding,
Yeah.
understanding at a deep, deep, deep level
Well, I'll give
the
you.
site, the environment, the design, like all of these things and how they weave together. And there's so much nuance in that.
Yeah.
And it's like, and again, there are people totally capable of doing this and that are doing it, but most quote unquote architecture and all of the buildings that
Yeah.
fall under that, which are not architecture, they don't have this.
Right. And that was the kind of the impetus of the question that I sent to you is like, why don't we talk about this, or why don't we teach this, or why don't we? And I didn't go that one step further of why don't we practice this? And it really is hard because you're right. How with all of the constraints of time and budget and speed of construction, speed of design, speed of do we really understand the purpose of the building and all of these other things that we basically throw aside this kind of like one aspect of the building that kind of embodies this spirit that when you think about and you've heard me ask this question of like what makes a building lovable, and I go back to all of these like modernist examples. I won't say modern, but modernist examples, like Farnsworth House, all of these Wright buildings, Kahn buildings, Corb's buildings, and all of these other ones. And you go there and you feel, I hate to say it, this spiritual kind of aspect of like the visit. Like you and I'm looking forward to in a few weeks. You and I are going to be going and visiting like my number one bucket list building that since the day that I saw it in architecture school, I've been looking forward to seeing it. And I hope it's not a letdown. To be quite
I'm pretty sure you're not allowed. I'm just gonna say it am I the CEO or the president? I mean, you're one and I'm the other. So
whatever.
I'm the CEO, you're the president. As a CEO of Archispeak, you can't mention the name of the
I
project you're
I
talking
won't.
about right now.
I
That's
won't.
got to be a surprise for a
Yes.
future episode.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I won't say it. But
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
yes, but I'm in the buildings that I have visited in the past of this particular architect and of buildings like this, there's always an emotional experience of like, how did they do this? How did they capture this
Yeah.
light? How did they capture this sound? How did they do this? Like, and it's all the inundation of all of the different senses working together to just make you feel almost overwhelmed in the space.
Hmm.
And I don't know. There are modern buildings that I believe fit this spirit of the place. A lot of times they're smaller pieces of architecture, residential or smaller commercial that, really kind of like stop and slow down and understand the place that they're built and
Mhm.
are site purposely built. And but you also see, and unfortunately I've been a part of projects that don't really embody where they're at. They don't.
Well, there's that, and then there's like the actual soul of the project, and
Right,
and
right,
and there are many, many, many soulless projects
right.
out
Yes,
there.
yes, yeah. And so it was kind of interesting to just kind of sit there and watch. So listen to all of the other volunteer docents throughout the day at the home and studio talking about Wright and talking about some philosophies, talking about the spaces and all of that other stuff. But I got to be there all day long from the early
Mm.
kind of chilly day at the beginning with a little bit of gray skies and overcast and chilly, to then it started to like brighten up and overcast. And there was a time when I was in the reception hall, and a reception hall really wasn't a speaking role. I was a floater, and I was like relieving somebody who had been there for a while, and they needed to take a quick break, and they were just like, look, this isn't a speaking role, but I have been saying, because they're waiting to go into the library, and they just came from Wright's office, that they kind of paused for a little bit, and instead of just sitting in awkward silence, we just say a little bit about the space. But one of the amazing things about the space is overhead, he has got him and these amazing kind of stained glass windows that he does. And he
Mm.
designed the stained glass clear story, or well, actually ley light. Sorry, let me get the terminology correctly. And had this stained glass ley light in there. It's this 1,500 separate pieces of glass. And they're all in a very Wrightian fashion, meant to evoke sitting under a tree, a canopy of a tree, with during the fall, because you can see like a variety of different colors and stuff. And then because there was an actual skylight above that ley light, letting in natural light, that during the day, when the light actually does pierce it and like fills this room with like a rich light, but also with like this little dappling of color and stuff.
I knew the word dappling was going to be mentioned. Yes.
Yes, the dapple definitely, is something
Yeah.
that gets applied with Wright. But so I'm sitting in the break room because I'm technically done for the day. I did 3 shifts, 2-hour shifts per, so I was done with my 6 hours.
Hmm.
Um, and I was off. I was waiting for some people to show up. That I'll tell that story in a minute. Um, but then the sun came out, and I just like sat up, and I'm just like, I got to go to the reception hall. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, sun is out. And all I could imagine when I was sitting in there is, what does this space feel like when the sun is out? And I
Mm.
and I rush over there. I because I had the little badge on that said,
Get to go
you know,
wherever you want. You got a
I,
hall
I,
pass.
I got a hall pass to go wherever I wanted
Nice.
throughout there, and could go through the back doors of everything. So I get to the reception hall, and it did not disappoint at all.
Mm.
It made this so when you it's a stacking view. Like, I'm gonna try to like see it. So it's the stacking view. Back all the way furthest from your view is the library, and it's just filled with natural white light coming in through the clear stories, and it just fills the room, and and the room is shining in the background. It's
It's calling out.
I mean,
Yeah.
dude, it's chef's kiss awesome. But the reception hall that's in between the studio and the library is where I wanted to go. And it's got a lower ceiling. It's it's this kind of like honey colored wood throughout the whole entire room. It's got a kind of a lay down space for you to for Wright to stand there with his drawings and looking at them with contractors or whoever else. And it's just also where, people sit and wait for him when they have a meeting with him. But it's so now with this like honey colored wood is now lit up with this colored light, and it like fills the room, and it really does feel very church like.
Mm.
And then you
When
have
you said that, I'm thinking of like this particular cathedral in Paris, right? And it's just
yeah,
like that's the thing. You walk in the space and it's like boom, it
yeah,
just smacks you. It
it's
just
a
smacks you in the face. And I haven't been there, but I've just seen photos and I know people who have and they're just
yeah.
like it's amazing, right?
There's
Yeah.
there's this cool chapel on Tuskegee University's campus that was done by Paul Rudolph, and he's got these angled colored like ocules, the
Mhm.
oculuses, these basically
Oculi.
these angled windows, square angled windows that are all colored, and it's a variety of different sizes and stuff. And throughout the day, depending on the sun angle or if it's overcast or whatever, they aren't really illuminated. And if you're in there and you're lucky enough to be in there, there's this whole wall that just illuminates in color. And
Mm.
you're just like,
Whoa.
you're like, damn, like
Yeah.
who's thinking of this anymore?
So I have a question for you because you mentioned it like you I got to get over to the lobby, right?
Yeah,
And I all spaces don't affect everybody the same, right?
right,
And so you I met other architects, especially with architecture, I would say have kind of a sensitivity
right.
to this. And I'm just curious what you think about that because I don't know that the general, I can't speak for somebody else who's not me, right? But the idea of that sensitivity being equal amongst everybody,
So
I assume it's a spectrum.
it probably is a spectrum, and there's probably people who are just like, nice room, nice finishes, kind of cool. But so what's funny is
Weird.
that, or weird. So what was funny is you round, when I rounded the corner, there was another volunteer in there, and they were just kind of like waiting. And there was a group in there, and then they were waiting. And before I got into the room, somebody was like, "Oh, wow, the light." And I circle the corner, go into the room, and this nice little old lady, she's talking about the light quality of the room. And the that particular volunteer, took their not speaking role to heart and didn't really say anything. And I was just like, well, but they were like the light, but nobody looked up. Nobody looked literally up to like right above their head, which was not really that far above their head
You're like,
to
oh,
see
not architects.
to see what is causing this light. And I'm like, well, if you look up, there's these 1500, because it's in my little book here.
You
I
have a
do have
cheat
the
sheet.
cheat sheet, but it was I went through like the script, but I had already kind of like learned the script, ad-libbed and all of that other stuff. And they were just like, that's fascinating. And then they started asking me questions, and I started like filling in some of the blanks. And of course they're just like, stuck to the script. Like, there's no script in this room. They're just asking questions. And the problem was, so like I was at the end of the tour. And of course, they come outside. It's a nice, sunny, brisk day. And like, well, you made it. You made it to the end of the tour. And it's just like, just a little bit more, and we can let you go and roam free. And I just, would crack the sarcastic jokes that I would. And so I would stay on script, but then nobody else is around. Nobody else is waiting to come out and all of this other stuff. So, and they're all just sitting there waiting, like, are you done? And even though I said, if you checked a bag, you can go that way and get your bag. And if you go that way, there's a really nice gift shop set up outside in the courtyard, and all the and this was again ad-libbing too. It's like, and all the proceeds go to, the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation and help support the maintenance of buildings like this. I totally created a new plug for them that nobody else was
Commercial.
saying. Like, nope, it wasn't on my little cheat sheet here.
Your
It was
cheat sheet.
just it
Yeah.
was just me like asking for support for a organization that I do kind of agree with, and seeing as how the reason I learned about this was because I'm a member, and they were like,
Hmm.
hey, if you're in Chicago and you're interested in this tour, and then it said down at the bottom of the email, and we're looking for volunteers. I'm like, what? Like, like, sure, I'll drive the 5 hours to go and volunteer for 6 hours
Right.
for the day and stuff. But I made it worth it. And I made it worth it because not only did I have a blast, actually, I had a blast. I mean, we got to tour some houses that, are all private homes that are never really open to the public, except for when they graciously kind of like let other people tramps through their houses for this tour. And there was 9 different ones, and of course Unity Temple. And I apparently was blasphemous. They're just like, oh, and don't forget Unity Temple. I'm like, man, I've been to Unity Temple so much, I don't need to see Unity Temple again. And they're just like, she's like, how dare you? And I was just like,
Okay.
I literally said, I've been there so much, I could probably give the tour myself. Because I have been there a lot. I love this space. I really do. And in fact, so while I was sitting there waiting while I kind of like saw this opportunity to go to the reception hall and check out the space and how the dappling light was filtering into the space and all of that other stuff.
Another project of his with dappled light?
No, no, no,
Wow.
no. While I was in the
Oh,
house after my
okay.
shift, when I rushed in there, I look
More
outside.
dappling, same project.
So
Yeah.
so
Okay.
this I'm segueing into the. So I look outside and I see a handful of my students, walking by. So they had asked me, we were talking a couple of weeks prior while we were in studio, and I was talking to them about graduation and everything else. One of the students was like, hey, Cormac, when are we ever going to do that tour that you're always talking about, like the importance of travel and seeing architecture, experiencing the genius loci. And though they didn't say it because nobody's teaching them that, I was just like, well, funny enough, I'm going to be in Chicago in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be volunteering at this Frank Lloyd Wright thing. And if you guys are interested, show up and I'll give you a tour around Oak Park, and then we can go and see some random architecture throughout the city. And it happened that not too far after that, we had a great lecture from Billy Chen, and she happened to be talking about the Obama Library, and that is under construction in downtown Chicago, not too far from the University of Chicago campus. Like, well, we can put that on our itinerary. I mean, here you are hearing a lecture from one of the architects of this amazing
Mm-hmm.
place. Let's go
Mm-hmm.
take a look at it. It's under construction. Let's go take a look at it. And it's pretty far along, so you can really get kind of like an understanding of what's going on. And so we got an opportunity to do that. We got an opportunity to basically just walk around the University of Chicago campus. Got out and saw a little bit of like some really cool, really elegantly designed brutalism. I'm having this kind of interesting renaissance with like brutalism. It's like there's some really brutal brutalism, and then there's some really beautifully elegant brutalism.
Mm-hmm.
And in that really beautifully elegant brutalism is just, something to behold. And this was a campus building on the University of Chicago's campus. And I did not write it down because they didn't have a sign on there, because it is an empty building that they're not using. And it's sad to kind of see it. And they were like, well, why aren't they using this? And so it was kind of fun. We're on the campus, right? And I don't know if you know anything about the campus, but if you go onto the campus, you can also go and see the Roby House. The Roby House, the one that everybody talks about, is the piece de resistance when it comes to the prairie style houses. And
Mm-hmm.
so we get there, and I know it's already closed. So we're just like, well, we'll just walk around the outside. And I've always talked about one of the most amazing things that I've noticed, and it's particularly prevalent in every single Wright house, Wright building, Wright whatever that I have ever been in, is this acoustical phenomenon that occurs in Wright buildings, where when certain areas that are of his compression areas, and depending on like where you're at with next to like a window or something like that. And
Some
so
hard surface. Yeah.
so I was like, all right, stand here. They're not underneath the canopy to go into the front door. And I'm like, just start talking. And they're like, okay, well, what do you want me to say? I'm like, just whatever you want to say, just talk to yourself, talk about, hey, why is that Cormac asking me to like talk while I'm walking? I'm like, walk towards the door. And then they're like, okay, like now, once you get to this spot, start moving towards the window, move towards the wall. And they're like, what am I listening to? You're like, what am I expecting to hear? Oh, wait, what's going on?
Like a
And it's just
ghost.
and then it's this immediate kind of like engulfing of the sound of around it's this complete like change in like the pressure of the sound, change in like the dynamics of the sound, change in the way that it's resonating around you. And it literally is in every single Wright building that I've ever been at. And
Mm.
I would love to say that he was conscious about this, but I would also love to say that because he was short and he designed his buildings around his more or less height and stuff, that it made some pretty interestingly compressed spaces. And yes, we always talk about that, compression and release. And even in his own home, you felt that compression and release. And all of the volunteers were in there. And I found a spot that I was looking for, and I found that spot. And everybody's just, and I'm like, I was like, have you, listened to the house? And they're like, well, what are you talking about? I'm like, come here. And I was like, just start talking, move closer to this wall, move closer to the wall, keep talking. And like, wait, whoa. And it's just like, everybody has this reaction of like, wait, what's going on with my voice?
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to like treat people to like this weird little discovery that I had decades ago at Florida Southern College, where it was the first time I'd ever experienced that kind of like acoustical resonant change in architecture. And I was just like,
Yeah.
I am so baffled by this. And I'm like, and every time I would go to a Wright house, I would find it. And I was like, all right, every time I'm
It's
going.
like your goal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely my goal. And so I constantly am always sharing that with. So it was kind of fun. So here we are at the Roby house, and I did that. I'm like, well, unfortunately the Roby house is closed, so we're probably going to have to. I was like, if you want to see this, we can come back tomorrow. We'll hit the first tour and we'll do that. And then as I'm walking, the two girls, they're like, hey, there's a chain here. I'm like, is the chain up? Yeah. Because like, it means that you're not supposed to go there. But I can step over it. Like, you don't want to step over it. I can step, and they're already over it. And
oh my gosh.
And they're already over it. And so they go up the stairs to get to the terrace, because this is the stairs to get off of the second floor terrace. So they go up to the second floor terrace, and they're in. And so we're sort of like quickly walking away. We're like, we're not with them. Because immediately across the street, and we're not talking about a very big street, parked right on the corner, standing outside of the truck, is a University of Chicago security officer, completely not paying attention to people trespassing on the Roby house. And so then we're walking around, and they're walking around, and they're walking inside the courtyard and all of these other things. And I swear somebody's going to hear me, and they're going to blacklist me from ever being able to visit the Roby house. And I have yet to go into the Roby house. I have been to the Roby house.
You're risking it big time right now.
I've been to the Roby house multiple times, and I've still yet to go inside on a tour. And so here's where I'm probably going to never be able to go in there, because I'm letting them know that I allowed some students to be in E there. Oh, and then of course they hop the wall and they get out and their stuff. And so we're now standing at the back gate, and they're just like, man, we could have just like, popped the gate open. And like, no, we're not going to pop the gate open.
Huh?
And they're like,
the heck? Entitlement.
And so they're like, well, we can climb over this. And then next thing I know, the rock climber, which I was telling him about you, I was just like, you need to meet Evan, because, he's a rock climber and stuff, that he's like scaling the gate, and he's hanging off of like the lintel piece. If you saw the photographs that I posted, and I'm like, really? I'm not gonna say any of their names so that they don't
protecting the thing.
I'll protect the guilty, and then
I'm not a snitch.
Then me and one of the other, he was just standing near me. He was just like, I'm not getting involved with this. He was trying to have 100% deniability that he was any of the hooligans that were breaking and entering into the old.
You don't want the wrath of the ghost of Wright either.
Yeah.
I mean, you really don't.
Yeah. So, well, I think his ghost would be at Taliesin, because that's where he died. Was the Taliesin.
Why do they have to be strapped down to one location?
I don't know. I don't know how ghosts work.
I don't know how they work either.
But it was kind of cool, because so in a way, what we did was we tried to, like, for me, it was somewhat reliving the very first architectural tour that I ever took, which was my professor taking us to Chicago that he knew very well, because that's where he grew up. That's where he went to school. He went to school at IIT. He studied under Mies. He worked under Mies. He was
a disciple, you mean?
He was a disciple. What was interesting is I looked I looked him up, and there's not much on my professor, but there is some information at the Mies van der Rohe Foundation or Society. I don't know if it's a society or foundation, but it's some group that basically keeps tabs of all of Mies's work. And do you know that Mies was his actual last name? His
No.
his birth last name was actually Mies.
Okay.
It was Ludwig Michael Mies,
Oh.
something like that. And he
A
dropped.
lot of architects back then changed up their names, right? I mean,
Yeah,
Corbu was another example, right?
he felt like it was too. His name was too pedestrian, so he went. Ludwig Mies, and I think Rowe was his mother's maiden name, or Roa was his mother's maiden name, and then he added the Vander. But he couldn't do
He
it.
was a designer, man. He
He
designed the name.
he couldn't, from what I remember from the book, is he didn't want to do it the German way, Van der Rohe or something like that, because that meant royalty. And so and since his mother was Dutch, he went with the Dutch Van der Rohe. And if you, and honestly, if you just turned me on to the podcast of interviewing Bjarke Engels, and if you listen to the way that he says his name, it definitely sounds as if it sounds more regal than Americans say it.
Yeah, right.
Far more regal. But so with that connection, I kind of wanted to take them to see some Mies. We weren't too far, so we went to the Obama Library, drove kind of like drove circles around it to take a look at it from a variety of different perspectives and stuff. Really was no reason to kind of get out because like the sidewalks were closed and all of that other stuff, and you kind of like were in an area where like we're fine with just kind of like driving around it. And so then they're like, all right, let's go to IIT, let's go to Illinois Institute of Technology, let's go look at some Mies van der Rohe. And we parked next to a building that I remember seeing on the cover of Architectural Record. And I was like, ooh, I remember that. And it's kind of fun because it was like, it's this one kind of like arcing building and the train is right next to it. And the train goes through another building that's right next to it. And it's just kind of cool. And then, of course, everybody was just like, I wonder how they keep the noise down. That would drive me insane, So they were like fixated on that. I'm like, these are actually interesting questions that you should be asking, especially as a young architect. So if you want to do something creative like that, you got to think through the problems, the constraints of all of these different things. So it was kind of cool to see them asking some interesting questions. So then we get to Crown Hall. We walk up the steps of Crown Hall. I snap off a customary picture of like tourist picture of them visiting Mies, and then realize that people are coming going through these locked doors. Door opens up. Somebody comes out and it shuts.
Stick your foot in there.
And it shuts, and they're just like, man, we missed this opportunity to go inside. So they just kind of like started like shaking the door, and then somebody walked over and just let them in. Didn't even like ask them, yes, can I help you? It's just like they were having their graduation, which was kind of cool because, here I am with a bunch of recent graduates, and they were just talking about, it would be interesting to see what, as we were kind of like driving over there, it would be interesting to see how our education kind of compares to these big city schools and things like that. Because I don't know, I guess you get kind of like this, whether or not, do you stack up, do you measure up to other architecture schools? And so they're going through and they're looking at all of these different projects, and they're wonderful projects. And they were sort of feeling a little like, man, I don't know if we spend a lot of time on design when we're doing this. And so we're looking at the fruits of the labor of these IIT students' work. They've got probably about 4 or 5 boards on there with a model, and it's all about design. And they're like, well, look how well this is designed and stuff. I'm like, all right, let me just nip this in the bud right now. Yes, they are. It's some beautiful work. And, you guys do some pretty fantastic work yourself, but don't compare apples to apples because your projects are completely different in the way that you do these projects than the way that they are. They've spent all of their time on the design and on the presentation of the design. You have spent the same amount of time doing a site analysis, solar analysis, wind analysis. You've done massing models and you've run them through the Cove tools. You have designed a mechanical system. You have designed a structural system. You've actually done detailing of that structural system and that mechanical system. You have integrated it all into the design. You've integrated it into the site. You have given us all of these things. You usually have like around 40 slides when you're presenting, and then you have all of these boards that you have up on the wall. So don't you dare like feel like you're diminishing, like you aren't stacking up to them. They had one challenge and they had one expectation. You had a challenge and you had an expectation. You may not feel like your design stacked up, but you had so much else that you had to worry about in the same amount of time, and in fact, in some cases, less amount of time to integrate everything. So your understanding of how complex the whole like architectural process is in the integration with all of the other things that we have to do and how that affects the design, you don't see it in these. And I was just like, so please do not compare yourself to them and think that you are not stacking up to them, because I honestly think that you are far past them in your understanding about the tools that you are going to need to survive in architecture, the questions that you're going to need to ask, the implications of everybody else's work on your work. I don't see it in these projects. I see beautifully rendered, beautifully articulated, but if you if you wanted to like look really hard at it and you could punch holes and like, does it meet? I mean, our students are doing code reviews and they're doing all of these other things. And it's amazing what they are actually learning to become, you know, practitioners, practicing architects and understanding all of those. And so it was kind of fun to kind of honestly see them looking at like looking through their lens at looking at other students and thinking that, are we as good as they are, when in fact they're as good, if not better.
Hmm.
And so I was, anyway. So then the next day we got to see a bunch of meese and everything else. And then we were getting ready to meese and a few others. We just kind of like drove around. My professor was a project manager on when he worked for, after meese had passed, and he was working for SOM, because that's where you go when you work for meese, right? You go to SOM.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, he worked on the Hancock building, and it was interesting that one of the students, he had said that his mother had met his stepfather at the John Hancock building. And so it was kind of fun because now you're like connecting everything else,
Yeah.
because I've started to kind of like preach this, when we talk about like the value of architects, and they're like, well, what do architects do? And then everybody kind of trivializes, oh, architects they design buildings, or they just do this and they whatever. And then I look at the more my touchy-feely side of things when I'm talking about it, and I talk about us creating memories, right?
Mm.
You've heard me talk about that, right? So I have to go through it again, but so that's what that was that when he told me the story of his mother and his stepfather meeting at the Hancock building, that's what I mean when I talk about these, that we create memories, that
Mm-hmm.
we may not know that we're creating these memories, but memories
Sure.
are happening. Memories are being affected. People's, like, their experiences, their lives are all being influenced by their surroundings, their environment, their place. And so like their memory is going to be, oh, you remember when we met at the John Hancock building in Chicago? Yeah. And now I
Mm-hmm.
could say that my professor was one of the people who helped work on that building. And so he may never know that that story happened, but that story is happening because of him and the people that helped put
Mm-hmm.
it together. So
That's cool.
anyway,
The next generation, man. I mean, there's this kind of potential,
yeah.
that you see and that you're acting on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, a lot of architects aren't doing that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that I had not lost touch with this professor, and I've heard that he's still around, and I was given some, points of contact to reach out to him, and I have, and I kind of like wax poetic about the effect that he had on my career and my sensibilities of what, I find important in architecture.
Hmm.
And I just hope that I'm doing him justice by what he taught me, that I'm able to teach somebody else and just share it with them. And it's just so happened that I was like scrolling through Instagram and hit Renzo Piano talking about the importance of travel. He was specifically talking about when architects travel, they are not tourists. They were observers. And
Totally.
and then the podcast that you had sent me to listen to, which was this Bjarke Ingels interview by
Rick
Rick
Rubin.
Rick Rubin. Wow, I I literally was about to say Rick Riley, but Rick Rubin. And when Bjarke was talking about, he feels like architects are investigative journalists.
Mm.
I agree with that. I agree that we are, for us to do our job right, we need to find out what it is, either about the place or the person or whatever it is
Sure.
that we're designing for. We don't have to be fully in depth into, okay, Cormac is now going to design a building for neuroscience research, but now I'm going to suit up and do some brain surgery. Not that, but at least
Not that deep.
but at least understanding about what they do, how they do it, how they work, you know, like how does a room set up that is the right room for them? Like where does all of their equipment go? Where does all of this stuff? And understanding that. And that's that investigative journalism kind of aspect of architecture that, we learn enough about every little thing that we need to make the building right, to work right for the
Yeah,
people.
there's that layer of it, and then there's like that what makes it special,
Right.
right?
Oh,
And that's
absolutely.
getting back
Yeah.
to kind of where we started. And
Yeah.
and it's not every space.
Nope.
It's definitely
No.
not every space.
No.
But it's you got to pick and choose the right spots to do that thing.
Yeah.
And hopefully you have the skills to do it because
Yeah.
that's what is that memory making part of it, right? Like, of
Yeah.
course, there's like, yeah, it's got to fire on all these cylinders. It's got to do the thing. It's got to function the way it's supposed to. It's got to
Yeah.
perform. It's got to flow. It's got to respond. It's got to do all those things. And man, if you got that extra layer of cream, right,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
on top,
Yeah.
it's like, whoa, like that's architecture. Yeah.
You and I are about to hit the road for the AIA convention again. So shout out to anybody who might be listening to this. Hopefully it gets published before the that. If it doesn't, sorry we missed you. But but I'm looking forward to what you and I typically do, which is go out and explore the place of where all of these things are held, and really
Hmm.
kind of explore the architecture, explore the space. Dare I say, explore the genius loci. But and I'm really kind of looking forward to that because have I been to Boston before? Yes. Have I been to Boston with the kind of like lens that
Yeah. Right.
I have now? Like I was an architect the last time I went to Boston, but I think my sensibilities have changed. I think the older I get, the more experience I get, I'm looking to constantly keep reconnecting myself with the meaning of why I do this. And as you and I have talked, we are always connecting, it's through the travel, it's through experiencing good buildings and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Me
And
too. Me too.
and I know for a fact that we are going to get some mileage out of some of the recording opportunities that we're going to get on this trip.
Wear your good shoes, people. Wear your good
Wear your
shoes.
good shoes, because you're going to need them. Because if you meet up with us, going to walk your feet off.
We'll be walking.
Actually, I will walk my feet off. Y'all will be probably perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so worried when I was in Chicago. I'm like, here I am, like many decades older than all of these kids that I'm walking around with. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna just drop somewhere. But held up,
Hopefully they notice.
held up,
Hopefully.
I held up well. I held up well. It wasn't. I took them to like the zoo, and we saw Studio Gang's little pavilion at the zoo. And because I had shown it to them because they did some mass timber projects, and I was showing them how you can elegantly terminate like mass timber into like the base of your column or whatever, and you know, they into this like steel turnbuckle kind of thing that they had there, or kind of like this mounting plate. And it was such this elegant kind of like transition to the ground, and I showed it to them numerous times. And so I happened to be out and about, and you know, it's just like, hey, when you guys get going, maybe we can meet up at the zoo. And I sent them a picture of that thing. That I've got to see that. And so I kind of waited around for them and waited around for them and waited for them because they are college students and have no concept of time. But then when we finally got there, it was kind of fun because then there was other architectural graduates that were using that as a backdrop for their posing with their cap and gowns, you know, with
Nice.
this, because if it if you look at the pictures that I posted on Instagram of the weekend trip, it frames out the backdrop. The city is the backdrop that this little pavilion frames out, and it's just it's a wonderful little space
Yeah,
that
for sure.
embodies a lot of character.
Very cool.
But anyway,
Boston bound.
Boston bound. Can't
All right.
wait.
See you there.
Yep.